Hello and welcome to this special live session of ET Auto. Today I'm joined by Mr. Lei Sing, Chief Editor, China Automotive Review. He has been tracking Chinese automotive industry for over 2 decades. As we know, that China has been the ground zero for COVID crisis, but now the things are changing. People are coming back to normalcy. Automobile dealerships are opening. The sales are reviving. To understand how the actual situation is in China, I'm joined by my friend and editor-in-chief of China Automotive Review. Welcome to ET Auto, Lei Sing. It's a pleasure having you here.
Well, thank you, Nabil. I'm very glad to be here and share my thoughts on the Chinese auto market, and also trying to learn, from you guys what's going on in India as well.
Yeah, sure. So first, can you give us a sense? We have seen that there was no fresh case of COVID reported for a fortnight, but 2 days ago, we again got about 1,200 cases. So can you tell me that is it going to hinder the normalcy, the progress that the industry and the automotive industry and the country was making in terms of moving toward normalcy?
Okay, you mentioned, ground zero. It still is the ground zero, but except it's, far ahead of other countries, especially in Europe and the US, in terms of, containing the outbreak. But the situations, it's. I want to use some executive quote. Hope is returning, but we are, seeing a few hotspots popping up again. So I think the way the Chinese government has been containing and the measures they implemented, it's very strict. So I think I don't think it's going to get too much worse, but we have to be careful.
Can you give us a sense of what kind of recovery has taken place in terms of production volume, in terms of sales, and overall value chain of automotive industry? Especially China acts as the backroom of automotive industry for global markets too. So how do you see it?
Well, maybe to put it into some perspective, I want to share you a few numbers. These are the numbers you might not heard of. Everybody knows China has been the world's largest market for since 2009. So it's about 28 million vehicles per year. You've probably heard these, but I want to point out that the auto industry is such a pillar industry to the economy that the auto industry and related industries accounts for roughly 10% of GDP. That's one. And then if you look at the total retail sales of consumer goods, last year it was 41 trillion renminbi. And how much that was autos? 10%, 4 trillion renminbi. And then that's two. And then number three, if you look at the industrial added value, it's the same percentage, roughly same percentage. So auto industry is really is so important that the country just announced the GDP growth was fell 6.8% in the first quarter. The country has been reporting retail sales of goods growth, two numbers: one with automobiles industry, and two without the auto industry. So you can get a sense of how important, how key the auto industry is. But back to the production sales itself, basically it's kind of a V shape from January to March. So we had a good month in January, and then February was really hit hard. It's basically minus 80% downfall, and then March picked up again. It was minus 40%. So it's slowly going up. And April, I'm expecting even more improvement, maybe 20-30% fall. And some forecasts saying that in the second half of this year, we might see even positive growth because the second half of 2019 was pretty bad to begin with. And now you're kind of seeing production resume, dealership traffic, all close to 100% of the production has resumed and all the dealerships, most of them have opened. And now so you're seeing people heading out again and making purchases. But how fast that will go, it's not going to be a light switch, right? You go back to normal. So we're going to wait till another quarter maybe to really see things back to normal.
Okay, so if you talk about the component industry also, Chinese component industry, auto component industry is very important, especially when we see the emergence of connected and electronics content increasing in automobiles, and largely it is imported from China in terms of India and various other markets. How do you see that situation? Do you think the Chinese auto component players are ready to resume their regular supply, and what is the situation there?
Well, in terms of the components industry, it's most of there's two different groups. There's a Chinese local suppliers, and then there are the foreign multinational suppliers. But the foreign multinational suppliers, they're pretty much localized, meaning that most of the components for car production is sourced within China. But you still have these key components, high-tech components that are being imported from outside of China for production. So this was one of the issues that during February, during when China was the most severe, was the production stoppages. It affected production elsewhere in the world. But now it's exactly the reverse. And what I've been hearing is for some of the big multinational suppliers in March, when they got hit in Europe and US, there were still limited production runs for the critical components that were needed to supply the Chinese production. So I think with things kind of improving, and you see these announcements from the European and the US automakers announcing that this week and maybe beginning of May that they will be resuming production in their markets. So I think components wise, it was a kind of a short hiccup maybe. And what happened, I think, in China is the coordination of the central ministries, Ministry of Commerce, the local ministries, to make sure that the component supply were available. I think there's really no secret formula. It's just kind of a just do it attitude, despite of the difficult conditions. So, and another thing I want to point out is maybe it was a little bit lucky that the kind of the outbreak happened during right around the Chinese New Year, when production was already stopped, and when workers, they had already returned home. So now if you look at the kind of the work and production resumption numbers, production is resumption is nearly 100%, but there's still kind of workers that need to go back, travel back. So I mean, I can give you an example of just having temporary workers from local where the production is based to come and train and work. There's a lot of different ways you could do it. So.
Lee, have you noticed some kind of change in terms of manufacturers? Like, is there a new trend that you see in terms of increasing automation or something of that sort? Because this is an extraordinary situation that has come up right now. So what kind of implication it has brought into the manufacturing process, especially on the shop floor? Do you notice any stark change there?
No, I don't think I've seen kind of a like I mentioned, light switch that you don't have the workers, you just turn everything into automation. No, it's not gonna work. What's going on is you have these protective measures that are in place. So you've seen, people, companies are putting, shields between workers, right? You got to wear a mask. That's the minimum. The way you go into work, you get your temperatures checked. Um, it's not that simple that you don't have workers and just make everything
Hmm.
automated. I don't think it's going to be that simple.
Oh.
You still need, the kind of uh, the expertise of the workers themselves assembling cars.
How do you see this, scenario for the after sales services, especially automobile sales, dealership functioning? Do you see a lot of digital influence coming up there in terms of selling cars, two-wheelers, or the automobile products, or even for service booking and all? Do you see some kind of massive trend change there?
I wouldn't say massive, but it's definitely a bigger change than what we just talked about on the production lines. So now you have, one company just, in terms of selling cars, they just set up their own kind of online streaming center, where they have a fixed place to have their executives go online and live stream and sell cars. And then you have other companies that are doing, door-to-door service, delivery, uh, you know, uh, sending your car keys to you via drones, things like that. There's a lot of innovative things happening. Uh, but I think the thing that we need to keep in mind is this slow ramp up of demand and purchases. And now there's kind of a debate whether there's going to be a huge kind of a gush of increase of vehicles, or do still people have enough money to buy. But there's definitely a lot of new innovative ways of selling, servicing vehicles. And the biggest reason for that's happening is because the Chinese is already a digital and connected societies. And you can see what happened during how they track, people for scanning codes to see where you've gone the last 14 days, right? So, I mean, it's happening faster. I wouldn't say massive, but there's definitely a change.
Do you find some silver lining there in the Chinese automobile market, and do you see some kind of winner coming out in this crisis time? Which are those companies or which kind of processes are going to win in this kind of crisis situation?
I think you just answered your own question because you said silver lining and then you said winners. So the kind of the silver lining is there will be winners and losers. And that process has kind of sped up by this crisis. So you've seen recently a French automaker kind of pull out of its joint venture, Renault, from with Dongfeng. But I don't think the crisis had anything to do with what happened with Renault. The fact of the matter is now it's purely a market-driven competitive landscape. And if you don't have the right kind of products that cater to the Chinese consumer needs, whether it's, I call it the three forces, whether it's the Chinese traditional automakers, whether it's the foreign multinational automakers, and whether it's the new kind of the smart EV startups, anyone in those group could be in danger of, being eliminated. And we just saw, one happen. So I guess the silver lining is the consolidation will really
Take
pick
place.
up.
So
So
do you see the consolidation to take place largely also in the shared mobility space. Do you see there's a massive impact on shared mobility because after COVID, because people are coming out now, China is the country, India is completely locked down right now, so we cannot see the impact right now if it had any impact on shared mobility or not. But the pundits in the industry suggest that this is going to be. How do you assess the situation in China right now?
Well, I think in the shared mobility space, you still have, the kind of the biggest player, Didi, right? Didi Chuxing. Uh, uh, I mean, they've, the way they operate their cars, they've put into protective measures within for drivers inside the cars. You see these films coming up, between the driver and the passengers, and how they disinfect the vehicles. Uh, I think it's too early to say because uh, you you know people have been in kind of a self quarantining or isolation mode for the last I don't know how many weeks.
Do you think the sentiment will be a bit more towards a tested technology, which is ICE engine, and EV will go down in terms of demand, and also because of the crude price going down, it has touched all-time low. So, do you think it will negatively impact the electric vehicles also in China and overseas market? How do you see it?
Well, I think it definitely will have an impact, but you know the situation China is facing now is we already had this kind of the first time the sales of NEVs, new energy vehicles, dropped last year, and this year so far the rate of decline is a little bit faster than the industry average. So that's why you've seen the government extend the subsidies and
Hmm.
also the exemption to sales tax for NEVs for another 2 years. So that's already a huge signal. So I think, and then you have the long term. China's 2025. The goal was to have NEVs account for 25% of the market, and so far this year, last year was less than 5%, and this year so far in the first 3 months, I think it was below 5% as well. So there's a kind of a huge gap that you need to grow in the next 4 or 5 years to reach that target. So you have the latest policies in place, and then you really have to. Another side of it is just products, the infrastructure. It's still a lot of improvement, and I don't think I think China has already had the experience of the NEV proliferation in the market for the past since 2009. So I think people are getting more used to the electric vehicles, and if I think really it's the charging infrastructure, it's the tech, it's the features that are going to attract more customers, and um, and then for as we mentioned before, uh, where's the demand? I think it's a very big issue now, is because similar things happening, like for example in the U.S., right? People lose their jobs, and then in China, the really the growth is coming from the lower tier cities,
Hmm.
and where these people, people who might have had the disposable income to buy cars, but because of the crisis, um, um, you know, it's it's not as clear, or it's not as that things will come back. It'll pick up rapidly. So we'll have to see.
Do you see this impact being specific to segments also, like it will have a different kind of impact in passenger vehicle segment and two-wheeler and three-wheeler or a commercial vehicle when it comes to electric vehicles? If you could
Um,
briefly answer that, yeah.
I'm gonna only talk about the passenger and the commercial. I know the Indian market is a big two-wheeler market, but I
China is
don't want
huge.
to go into
Yeah.
details. But so I think the commercial vehicles have been less impacted by the crisis. And if you look at the numbers,
So
the
any
growth.
specific to EV, right? You're talking about electric
Yeah.
commercial vehicle. Okay.
Okay. If you're specific to EVs, most of it is still passenger vehicles. But what I was saying before is the CVs, they were less impacted during the crisis because, if you count the vans and the trucks, the light trucks and the light vans, a lot of production went into producing the ambulances, which are based on, the light vans, the vans. And then you have these demand go up for, logistics, transport, during the difficult time. So commercial vehicles were less impacted. But if you talk about the EV market, yes, most of it is still the passenger vehicles. And I think private consumption, another characteristic in the Chinese market, it's going up. But we talk about the shared mobility market. That segment has bought quite a lot of the passenger EVs and the smaller type EVs.
Lee, do you think the current scenario will, help people buy or change the sentiment of the people in favor of owning a car, which was right till now, largely moving towards shared and ride-hailing services? How do you assess it?
This is a debate that's going on. I personally don't think if we go back to SARS in 2003, there was a huge kind of a gush, but that happened during the time when kind of the cars were just people were just started buying cars and it was coming into families and there was a lot of demand even before SARS. So SARS kind of boosted that. But now we kind of have, I mentioned China sells 28 million vehicles a year. I personally think 30 million is roughly kind of a threshold. I don't expect annual sales to be any significantly higher than 30 million units, even though this year and last year was like less than 26 million. And this year, I don't know, it could be 22, 23 million, maybe even less. So there will be definitely people that will move up their buying, but I don't want to come to a conclusion that is going to really gush. I think we still need to wait and see because you have these new policies and stimulus measures being introduced nationally and locally. So there's a delay, there's kind of a lag effect. So we have to really see the Q2 numbers to be able to tell for sure that this would drive more consumption of private vehicles.
Is there any estimation or your think tank has done some kind of calculation on when do you expect China to come back to full capacity in terms of manufacturing, in terms of sales? Is there any estimation on that?
Well, around mid-year, that's what I've heard. June, again, after the first quarter or after the first half of the year. As some manufacturing plants, production has already been back to kind of the 3-shift model, but I think most of it is right now. When we talk about production resumption being back to close to 100%, that does not equal to saying that capacity is back to normal. No. It's a slow process. So we really have to see, what happens, after, after May or June.
Just trying to understand, Lee, do you think, because so far China is known for being the hub for global manufacturing, and supply chain hub, looking at the current situation, which is, of course, it is unprecedented, and a crisis like this really triggered a lot of new thoughts, fresh ideas. Do you think the global market will a bit shy away from putting one central location for manufacturing? Do you think in such a scenario, China may lose a bit of a strength as a hub for global manufacturing or the global supply chain in automotive
No,
or
no, I don't think so. The answer really is simple. If you need to win globally, you need to be in China. You need
mm,
to have a big presence in China, and a lot of foreign automakers do. But having said that, you will see starting to see those that are, you know, that haven't performed well pull out. I wouldn't be surprised if someone else following Renault, pulled out of a joint venture, and that's why you're gonna see as the strong gets stronger, and there's obviously quite a few Chinese brands that have come up over the recent years, and those are the reasons why some of the other foreign automakers that haven't performed well, it's just lost to competition. So China is such a important market, and even for manufacturing, that I know there's some guy out there saying that, okay, you guys need to come back for production, but I don't think it's that simple just to pull out, and it's such a big market that I- you know I I wouldn't go
of late we have seen, a lot of Chinese automakers trying to come to India, to have already come, and some like Chang'an and Geely, they are on way to enter. There are many other companies that is looking at India as a market for them. Looking at the current crisis situation, do you see some kind of change in the thought of these corporations? And also in terms of government, will the government tell its corporations to invest largely in domestic market, which is China, rather than going out? Do you see some kind of slowdown in the Chinese players which are operating in India? Like we have SAIC subsidiary, we have GWM, which has come recently. How do you look at it?
it's only natural that the Chinese brands, they once they're have their foothold in the Chinese market, they would expand globally because they want to be international. And I was, looking at the Auto Expo earlier in February, and we had a correspondent who wrote for us, and he said the Chinese brands saved Auto Expo. I don't know whether you agree to that or not, but basically what I heard from him is, the four brands, BYD, MG, Great Wall, Haval,
Yeah.
Haima, I think they took a big presence in Auto Expo, and despite that was during the time when it was getting very crazy in China because of the crisis. But I think that reflects that they already had a good localized presence in India to be able to still hold with their local executives, hold the whether it's press conferences or do the auto show. But yes, the Chinese government encourages export, encourages these brands to go global, and they themselves, they want to do that. India is such a close market and close country. Why not? And you see different strategies. You see kind of Great Wall Motors purchase the GM's I forgot the name, Bergon manufacturing facility, right? Uh, and then Haima working with Bird, right? The Bird is a local company
Yeah,
in India.
border. Yeah, yeah.
Different approaches. Um, with this crisis, I think it's the same for China or for the U.S. or for India. It's just a matter of resume things in a gradual way to normal. And I think Chinese brands, maybe we'll get into this later, is that you already have, uh, uh, Xiaomi's, I think, is pretty popular in India, right? In the mobile phone, smartphone market. So I think it's only a matter of time. But again, it's the Chinese brands really need to, the way foreign companies localize in China, the Chinese really have to cater to the local Indian taste, but it's the same thing. So
So, do you see any kind of change for the automobile dealers there in China, their sales processes, or what are their steps? How have they come back to the selling spots again? How are they back to their dealerships? What has been the process? Give us some sense. How did they progress towards it after the lockdown?
I mean, it's the same as almost same as the manufacturing, put into protective measures in place, um, and utilizing a lot of the online and offline kind of O2O processes, and making sure that when customers come in, that the right measures are in place. 6 feet, whatever. Masks. It's once, because everything this is related to what's happening in the country when the cases are going down, when things are returning to normal, and they feel sure that they can attend to customers. Their workers are safe working. Their salespeople, their after sales people, they have the right measures in place. Then they open up. There's no other way or secret formula.
Thank you, Lee. Before we move to the questions from our audience, and thank you so much for taking the question. And as you wanted to ask me the question, but I said you are my guest, so you will be the first to be quizzed. So over to you now. If you have some questions, you can ask. No problem.
Yeah. Basically, I mean, I know, in the Indian market, the Japanese brands, especially Suzuki, are working with Maruti, right? They've been quite successful, kind of developed into this local, uh, you know, uh, it's a local brand. And same for a
Yeah.
lot of the foreign brands like Volkswagen in China. It's already a local Chinese brand in a way. So I'm wondering, uh, what I mean is, I'm wondering, do you think the Chinese brands have a chance to get to that level? I mean,
Uh,
can the Chinese brands, automotive brands, become the Xiaomi of India?
it's a very
What do you think
difficult
about that?
question, but let me put it this way. Uh, there has been some episodes with some of the Chinese brand, low cost Chinese brand came in, especially in two-wheeler space, and the people did not have very, you can say, very positive impact of that because they came and they went back. But after this, MG Motors came, okay, and they got a pretty good response from the customers here. Their only product, Hector, featured in top 10 selling passenger vehicles. Also, they were one of the largest selling SUVs in India. But now what happens that MG Motor is trying to push itself is largely a British brand than being a Chinese brand. So they are trying to uh, shy away a bit, if I'm right in my assessment, and that way they are working. But there's only one challenge that Chinese brand when it comes to automobile is high cost product that people are going to buy, and here a lot of money goes. So mobile and automobile is completely different, two different products, because probably car is second biggest investment for anybody who makes here in India after buying a house. So taking a decision for a car, it's very important that they go with a brand or product which gives them reliability. And when it comes to Chinese products, there has been largely image that I'm sorry to say that, but there is a perception that Chinese brands in general are not durable, they are not very high quality. So the Chinese players have to play that role, and they have to establish themselves as a brand or product which are durable and good quality. So that's it. Otherwise, feature-wise, I think MG Motor has done wonderful in terms of design, in terms of features. Even GWM, Great Wall Motors, attracted a lot of people to their stalls. I think that was one of the most crowded. MG and GWM was one of the most crowded stalls during the Auto Expo. So the design and everything was accepted by the people here in India. Only in long term, if you want to really establish in India, they will have to create value for money apart from that, providing assurance of quality. I think these are the few things that they need to understand.
That's a good, fair assessment. I need to tell the companies back in China.
Yeah, that's what it is right now. But I think slowly the acceptance of Chinese brand, which was Chinese product largely in aftermarket, the aftermarket music system, a lot of gadgets in the cars were already being used, made in China, and they were imported by traders here. But now I see the kind of response people have given to MG. I think the wind is blowing in positive direction for Chinese brand, but they need to give an assurance that there should not be any uh, problem in terms of quality. But features, they have certainly won.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how about the market overall? I mean, in terms of growth, what's the volume now? What's the
So
expectations, down the road?
So, yeah, in passenger vehicle, the things were not so great even before COVID because of the overall economic slowdown that we were experiencing in the past few quarters. We had achieved 3.3 million units of passenger vehicles domestic sales last year, and this year we were expected to be below 3 million, but with this, I think we will not go beyond 2.6 million of 2.6, maximum 2.6 million of passenger vehicles after COVID. Last month we
Wow.
saw a drop of about 30%, 25, 30% in the passenger vehicle segment. Similarly, two-wheeler segment also. The other problem here is that we are leapfrogging to BS6 emission norm from BS4. We are the only country that is doing this. And now, because of that, also there has been some cost pressure. The cost of the products have gone up really, and a part of it is being passed on to the customer. So the price of the vehicle has gone up. That is also impacting the market in certain segments. So there is a complete transition that is happening in Indian market, but let's see how things go further. Right now, the dealers are struggling a lot here because they have, at the one hand, they have inventory backlog of BS4 that they need to clear. Thankfully, due to the slowdown and weak demand, the production was already curtailed even around November, December last year only. That's why we did not have huge pile up of the inventory, but we still have decent pile up going up to 5 to 7 lakh units of BS4 vehicles, which needs to be exhausted, or the OEMs might try to export it to some other countries where BS4 is still applicable. So,
Well, yeah.
not
Yeah.
a great time. Cross segment, commercial vehicle is the largest impacted segment here in India right now. And then two-wheeler also. The rural demand, which is largely driving the demand for small cars. India is largely a small car market. That's how Maruti Suzuki commands over 50% of the market share. So if you look at India is the unique market where over 70% of the market share, about 70%, I must say, about 50% by Maruti Suzuki, about 17-18% by Hyundai. So they
Yeah.
two put together close to 70% they command. Others, many players like you talked about Volkswagen, Nissan, despite being here for many years, they have not been able to cross more than 1% or 1.5% of the market share.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
the situation.
to compare, you said the passenger vehicle market won't get above 3 million. In the first quarter in China,
Yeah.
the passenger vehicle market was around 3 million, even in this difficult time. So it's such a huge difference in volume. And
So our
also,
penetration level is very low. We have about 22 cars per thousand people. We are the largest two-wheeler market. We sell about 21 million two-wheelers every year. So total automobile market size hangs around 24 million, which I expect to come down this year further.
yeah, but in China, we don't count motorcycles into
Yeah,
vehicles. And
yeah.
also, in China, the per thousand ownership right now is, I think, just below 200, maybe between 180 and 200. And also, just another example, Volkswagen has about 20% of the passenger vehicle market. And then it's a bunch of others.
So all the global mega players are fringe players in India. Let me put it this way: Maruti Suzuki uh, has the biggest share. They have the lion's share, and they continue to, despite all the disruption, all the change happens. They are so well connected with the market situation. They understand the market so well, especially the rural market, that they every competition they are able to. Now they are also they beat Mahindra and Mahindra, which used to be a number one SUV maker in the country or utility vehicle maker in the country 2 years ago. Now continuously Maruti Suzuki with two three products only, they have emerged as the largest UV maker, also utility vehicle maker also. And especially Indian utility vehicle space is driven by compact SUVs.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
So what's the potential? I mean, in China, I said 30 million is kind of the threshold. What's the,
We are looking at you are the world largest passenger vehicle market. We are looking at 5 million units, by 2025, but no
wow,
2020. But now it looks difficult for us to achieve because we have seen
jeez.
the situation. Now it doesn't look happening even by 2025. 5 million passenger vehicles. That's our target. That's the threshold that we are going after right now.
Well, it's such a difference. It also has to do with infrastructure, right? Roads are different,
Yeah, roads have increased a lot,
habits,
but the
right?
problem is that the equal distribution of the economy is what we need to work on, especially in the rural market, rural areas, job creation. That is other area where we need to focus. The uh, average income of the people needs to go up. So that's the reason only few percent of our total population can afford cars right now. So we are working in this direction. We have grown very fast in terms of road creation. Also, we have built a world one of the largest, road network now we have. I think second largest after China. So
Oh, okay.
we are building every day. We were building about 20 4 kilometers of NH National Highway only.
Wow, fascinating.
So we have upped the ante in terms of infrastructure development. In the last 20 years, we have made quite great progress in this direction also. We are also working towards EV quite aggressively. Let's see how it unfolds.
it's still EVs are still kind of there's minimal, right? Minimal volumes right now, right?
Yes, EV is largely here, e-rickshaws, a three-wheeler kind of thing that puts you on first mile and last mile connectivity. So that's the most popular. There we see the largest volume coming up. Two-wheeler is still picking up a lot of players. A lot of local startups have come up. They are still importing a lot of kits from China, and they are assembling and selling here. So two-wheeler and passenger vehicle is yet to take off. But I tell you that if you talk about the core, if we minus the unorganized three-wheeler segment, which is the largest, of course, in terms of overall EV volume. But if you talk about two-wheelers, passenger cars, and buses, year-on-year growth has been 20%. So despite the overall, the market degrowing, the ICE engine is market is degrowing, but the EV has done reasonably better because we have very small volume, like 1.34 lakh. That's our volume, 130,000 units. That's our volume for these organized, segment
Oh,
like two-wheeler, passenger vehicle or buses.
well, I think in the
Well,
first quarter, China's NEV sales was around that number,
okay,
111, 120,000.
okay, okay,
So
great. So let's, if you don't have any more question, I'll take up some questions from the audience,
sure,
Lee. Okay.
sure.
So this is a question coming from Mr. Padma Venkatraman. And the question is, if China were allowed to draft a blueprint for EV infrastructure, what would be the recommendation? What do you think should be recommended for India?
Can you repeat the question?
If suppose China was, or you were given a chance to draft a blueprint for EV infrastructure in India, what would be your highlights? What will you do?
Wow, that's a tough question. Well, I can share, what China has done. I mean, China right now, I think the latest numbers that I've got is in terms of chargers or charging piles, it's over 1.27 million, and I think privately owned it's roughly 700,000 versus public, which is 500,000. Roughly, you add up to 1.2 million. I can't tell. I'm not going to be in a position to say a kind of a blueprint, but it's I think what China has gone through is in terms of charging infrastructure is you have these um, kind of state grid, the national player, and then you have these smaller kind of the regional or local. I can mention Star Charge, TELD. Um, these were kind of companies that were born out of local regions, and they've used kind of innovative models of charging to grow their market share. And now what China wants to do is utilize some of the residential areas where there's both parking available and also to build space to build charging. Uh, and the way subsidies are given is also different. Before it's being given to NEVs. And before the subsidies, there was a national subsidies and local subsidies for buying NEVs. Starting in 2018, the local NEVs were eliminated. And instead, the local subsidies were going into local construction of the charging infrastructure. Kind of, it's the Chinese wording is it's giving you kind of rewards instead of subsidies. I don't know the difference to that, but it's basically a different way of kind of promoting and boosting the local charging infrastructure. And then And then just in strategic locations, along there's a north-south couple of highways, expressways, that on the rest stops, you have these charging places available. And then in China, the overall network is described as a 10 horizontal, 10 vertical, and 2 circles. That's the way they describe this charging network. So you have these, from the top down kind of, oh, okay, we're gonna do this, 10, 10, 2. And then from the local bottom up is these local players, they have their business models, whether it's the type of chargers, whether it's, smart apps, to search for apps for easy, convenient for the users. And then another part of this infrastructure debate is on battery swapping. Battery swapping only, so far, the only company that's doing this in a large scale is NIO, right? The Chinese smart EV startup. And then for the taxi companies, like for in Beijing, for example, they have these swap stations for the taxis because they go around in fixed routes. So I think for battery swapping, it's kind of a back burner. So it's pilot demonstration style for now. So I don't know. I don't know whether I've answered that question in terms of
No, you have
whether it's
you have very well.
print.
So let me take next question. We have less time, so I request if you could be precise a bit. Sorry about
Okay, yeah, I
that.
digress. Sorry.
Next, we are in a profession where we become very elaborate and we have to answer quite long.
Yeah.
But now next question comes from Ramashankar Pandey. He is MD of auto component company operating in aftermarket. So he wants to understand how did China gradually open up its aftermarket or repair services? After are we back to 100% there? What's the new share of business between OEs and independent aftermarket?
Well, the share is still very much geared toward the OEM. The independent aftermarket is very, very fragmented, but you've seen these chains, different business models, e-commerce, O2O, like Tuhu. It's an independent chain, and then also companies themselves, like SAIC Motor, they have their own 车厢, their own. So you have these different business models, but still, I think people still depend on the 4S, the so-called 4S dealerships. It's still the majority of the market share where you go to maintain and fix your cars, repair your cars.
Well, I'll skip all those questions that I have already taken up during our conversation. The next question I'm taking is from Soumya Mandal. He wants to understand Chinese brands see global, means some company which are global like Suzuki, but in India they became almost local by joining hands with Maruti Suzuki. So as main competition, they are the main competition, or those completely local like Tata, Mahindra, who do the Chinese manufacturers see as their main competition in India?
Well, it's the same as we were talking to China. So the competition will be the foreign players, but in this case, the Indian local domestic brands are also considered foreign players because they're Chinese brands in a different country. So it'll be the Indian brands, and then obviously all the other foreign brands that are already present, established, Suzuki, Hyundai, Volkswagen, Ford, whatever. But I think the Chinese brands, I think they have they think they're well stacked up to compete with the foreign brands. So
Okay. So, looking at the current, we have seen that there's a lot of talk happening, like, the global trade scenario will change after this situation. Do you see it having an impact on Chinese market, especially? Is it going to be largely negative for China, or do you see a positive in this a new trend that we are going to see, or a new normal that is going to emerge out?
Well, maybe this is a question I should ask all these foreign multinational players and their senior executives. But uh, anyway, there's definitely talk of the so-called deglobalization because of this friction going on, let's say between China and the U.S. And the U.S. and Europe, right? There's different frictions going on. But like I said at the beginning of the show, it, you know, it's a gradual process. I wouldn't think that all of a sudden this global trade would stop. China depends on the global auto industry as much as the global auto industry supply chain depends on China. So I wouldn't see any drastic measures that will go into place to stop this globalization.
So I have over many questions coming up across platform, but I'll take last two questions if you permit, Lee.
Sure,
So, okay. So next
I still have
question.
time if you have time.
Yeah, of course I have. Let's address as many questions today for our audience as possible. But I'll have to see the recording also to continue till then.
Right. Okay.
Okay, the next question comes from Mr. Krishna Rao God. He wants to ask this question. Most of the EV manufacturers in India source their components from China. It is obvious that in the current scenario, large volumes will be unthinkable. Indian companies have to limp back to normal levels. What will be the strategy adopted by Chinese suppliers in terms of volumes and pricing? And what will be the strategy adopted by Indian companies in thinking up of alternate channels?
Okay. That's a tough question as well. um, well, I think there's two sides. I think on the one side you have the Chinese suppliers. They have to figure out their kind of a strategy because they're ramping up in China. So they need to there's some numbers in China. Is the OEM installation rate of batteries that has been also gradually going back up. So it's an issue of the Chinese suppliers taking care of business in China, and then whether for other markets that would just simply be an issue of balancing their supply. For example, to the Indian market. But I would say this. I would suggest that this is a tough time for everyone, uh, and I guess a big factor would be, or a big, um, that just a matter of working things out, amicably. I don't know whether there's any, uh, 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 right or wrong answer or secret formula, so that one side is better than the other, or I mean, it's a tough situation. I don't think I have the answer, to it. So for now.
This question, what lessons can Indian auto component manufacturer learn from China in terms of strengthening themselves as a supply chain hub for the global market? What would be your tips? You have observed so many companies there in China. What are the two, three things you think they do that is very important for anybody to become a global supplier and hub for supply chain in automotive?
A few things maybe. One, kind of the can-do attitude, just do it. Two, the kind of the top-down, bottom-up approach. You have the Chinese, government, different ministries, commissions, coordinating, the processes. And then just I think when the times gets tough, the tough gets going, right? So I think maybe the biggest lesson is, the in times of crisis, you kind of rise up. I mean, for many of the Chinese manufacturing, whether it's OEMs or suppliers, it's just putting things into place, in a short amount of time. A lot of coordination going on between the higher level up and down at the local, to your employees, to senior management. Communications wise, you set up task forces to coordinate things, just and the expectation that you won't be back to normal with a light switch. The right expectations to help you move forward. I think that's very important.
So, Lee, my question, last question, this is from my side itself. In India, we have seen tier 2, tier 3 suppliers are in the most difficult phase right now in terms of their demand is gone almost. It's very tough to operate. They will not probably get support from their tier 1 suppliers, like, dealers at least. They will get support from the OEMs because they have to sell their cars. In such a scenario, how the Chinese supply value chain works for their small players, and what would be your message for Indian small component suppliers, those who are tier 2 and tier 3?
Well, like I said just now, it's kind of the understanding between these up and down the supply chains, and maybe just offering what I've seen, at least in China, is companies offering kind of different terms in terms of your receivables or your days when you have to pay. I don't know, things like that. But as tough as it is to say that, what happened in China is there were cases where the local governments helped organize and search for new suppliers during the crisis. And I'm not sure whether the previous suppliers they got back. So you will see, but I mean, China is, there's hundreds of thousands of suppliers, and even the tens of hundreds of suppliers making the same component even in one city or prefecture. So there was a lot of flexibility, but it's just a matter of working things out. And unfortunately, if some of the smaller players, they it's tough to say that that they might be out. But that's just a market. I mean, it's tough.
Thank you, Lee, for joining us. Hope our collaboration works well and we further expand this discussion with more experts joining in. Probably you can bring in experts from China. I'll try to bring some industry leaders from India, and we can take this collaboration further and we'll decide on that, and we can make it a more often kind of show than once in a while, right?
Yeah, sure. And
Thank
I
you.
hope I've provided good information to share with the Indian audience and
It
the
was
global audience.
very
Yeah,
insightful answers you have given, and thank you so much for being so candid and taking out time. Thank you so much, Lee, for joining ET Auto Conversation.
well, thank you for having me again. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you.